For thousands of years, humans lived in harmony with the natural world. However, in recent centuries, humanity has increasingly distanced itself from nature, viewing it as a resource to be exploited rather than a partner to be respected. As humans have expanded their cities and infrastructure, they have encroached on natural habitats, destroying ecosystems and displacing countless species. Humans have become accustomed to a lifestyle that relies on the consumption of vast amounts of resources, including food, water, energy, and material goods. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation are just a few of the challenges facing humanity today. If humanity is to address these challenges and create a sustainable future, it must recognize the value of nature and work to restore its relationship with the natural world.
It's pretty mind-blowing, but the short article was actually written and presented by AI. I specifically asked ChatGPT to write me about how humanity has broken relationship with nature, and I must say these thoughts unexpectedly aligned perfectly with my concept for this short film. My goal was to showcase the use of 360 cameras for shooting cinematic videos, and in this tutorial I'll walk you through various aspects step by step, demonstrating how 360 cameras seamlessly integrate into a cinematic concept. And of course you'll get behind the scenes look at how I captured these shots featured in the intro. Let's start with one of the most fundamental aspects and talk about aspect ratio. As a general rule, we can note that most movies are filmed with a slightly wider field of view than usual, resulting in a distinctive aspect ratio. This goes beyond the simple crop of the top and the bottom of a standard 16:9 video, because in many cases filmmakers use so-called anamorphic lenses, which natively provide twice as wide field of view as a spherical lens of the same focal length at the same camera position. This sparked the idea that it might be achievable even with a 360 camera given its infinite field of view. All it requires is cropping the section I want to use, so I conducted an experiment showcased in the intro, capturing cinematic landscapes both in and out of the city. While both the Insta360 app and Premiere Pro with the GoPro Reframe plugin offer the option to reframe footage into a wider aspect ratio, I in some cases skip this step with my footage. I simply set up a 4K cinematic timeline and drop my 6K 360 raw materials. This approach resulted in real wide-angle shots in high resolution, fitting the image into a widescreen format. I do the framing in post using the offset plugin, allowing me to scroll my image infinitely. This prevents any potential issues of hitting the edge of the frame based on the camera orientation during shooting. And besides scrolling my image horizontally, I can gently refine it vertically too. It's very important as better frame compositions lead to more cinematic look. Following the rule of thirds and using leading lines or symmetry helps in creating visually engaging shots. We have a huge freedom in these settings during post-production. Moreover, we can enable guidelines or create our own grids to use as an overlay during framing. To maintain a realistically wide field of view, I typically keep my zoom at 100%, although in certain cases I might slightly zoom out. And I really love the freedom of composing my video in post. Let's take a look at this simple elevator shot. I held my selfie stick, placed the camera against the glass surface and recorded both the view and ourselves simultaneously. In post-production I could craft two different B-rolls from the same raw material, one looking through the window and another showing us in the elevator. And I love this wide shot, which looks very cinematic, almost getting a kind of anamorphic wide-angle look. Whether shooting landscapes, the footage appears impressively wide, and maybe no one will ever realize that it's a 360 raw material. However, if needed, I could use reframe plugins to get rid of the curves near the edges. This is especially recommended for close-ups like in this airplane footage. I apply GoPro Reframe plugin, configuring a widescreen output and experimenting with framing and distortion settings. And essentially this is how we can achieve a naturally wide field of view with or without using reframe plugins, and of course without having to shoot with anamorphic lenses. But now let's see another crucial aspect: cinematic camera movements. In movies we see smooth and intentional camera movements such as dolly shots or pans for cinematic fluidity. When recording in 360 using Insta360 flow state stabilization, we can effortlessly replicate such movements with just a selfie stick. Even with low frame rates, we have the capability to imitate smooth slow motion sequences. It only requires a bit of practice, and soon enough we can master the art of creating stunning cinematic camera movements like tracking, panning, tilting or dolly moves. And doesn't matter if we shoot with standard frame rates, we can still achieve slow motion-like shots with smooth and slow camera movements. Or we can even track objects like a pro without having to use an overkill setup on the spot. And here comes another important aspect, talking about frame rates. With Insta360 cameras, we have the flexibility to manually set them for the project, keeping it low, like 24 FPS for a more traditional cinematic feel. Shooting with lower frame rates can be advantageous, especially in low light conditions, allowing us to set lower shutter speeds in case we want to keep the 180-degree shutter rule, while filming at 24 FPS will give us a lovely cinematic appearance even in daytime shots. Maintaining lower frame rates is also important to keep our video in the highest resolution possible, while we can still get nice smooth camera movements as mentioned before. And don't forget to talk about colors and color grading, a significant component in creating a cinematic look. Consistent color grading can evoke a specific atmosphere, while often a muted or teal and orange color palette is used in movies. Shooting in log mode enables us to achieve a wider dynamic range, lower in-camera contrast and muted colors. And these elements help us in color grading and contribute to a cinematic look. Sometimes the slightly washed out and undersaturated image looks appealing straight out of the camera, but of course we have the freedom to create our own style and a custom look. During shooting I prefer manual exposure, controlling the ISO and shutter speed depending on the scene. This also grants me the flexibility to intentionally over or underexpose the shot. Additionally, it helps in avoiding noise in the image, making color grading a smoother process. Now, having covered aspect ratio, framing and composition, camera movements, frame rates and color grading, there are only a couple of aspects left in our cinematic toolbox. One of them is storytelling pacing, which more or less stands independent of our camera choice. Or does it? Certainly we must pay attention to the rhythm of our edits and the pacing of our shots to create a narrative flow. To afford ourselves enough flexibility during editing, we need to be prepared during shooting. As shooting with 360 cameras can be really quick and easy, I often record the same clip with identical camera movements at different paces. For example, I might capture a faster and slower take, sometimes without even stopping recording between them, simply repeating the same action with minor variations. Additionally, I commonly record the same movement in both directions. The outcome is multiple versions of the exact same take, giving me the freedom to choose the most fitting one during editing. Occasionally a longer shot may be needed, while in other cases a shorter take is enough. It may also turn out that certain camera movements fit better in my final video in the opposite direction. Having different versions allows me to make these decisions without modifying the speed of the video or reverse playback in post, thereby avoiding artifacts like unnaturally fast-moving objects or people walking backwards in the scene. Last but not least, in my opinion, there is one more aspect that significantly influences the cinematic look, and that's the depth of field. It involves using a lens with a wide aperture to achieve a shallow depth of field, effectively blurring the background and directing attention to the subject. Unfortunately, this is the one aspect that doesn't quite align with 360 cameras. Despite their relatively low f-numbers, thanks to fisheye lenses, everything remains in focus without the possibility of achieving a shallow depth of field. For this reason, I don't recommend 360 cameras for close-ups where a blurry background is desired. However, there are filmmakers who prefer a deep depth of field and enjoy experimenting with this shooting style. Although it's more challenging to achieve with a traditional filming gear than shooting with a shallow depth of field, as deep depth of field shots require significantly more light. Regardless, with 360 cameras it's not a matter of choice. Essentially we end up shooting with a deep depth of field, which works well for landscapes and nearly in any situation except close-ups with blurry background. If you're passionate about creating cinematic travel videos or capturing stunning B-rolls for indie films or low-budget movies, the 360 camera can be an excellent choice. As demonstrated, these cameras meet various expectations for creating cinematic shots while offering additional features in post-production that provide freedom in reframing later. I hope you found these tips useful and inspiring for experimenting with 360 cameras in content creation. If you did, please give a thumbs up, and for more 360 contents and tutorials, subscribe to my channel. See you next time!